All right, 701, welcome, 702, welcome everybody. My name is Tressie Evenson, and I am the Director of Financial Aid here at Augustana University. I have a couple of my colleagues keeping track of the chat, and they're gonna kind of compile everyone's questions, and we'll hit those at the end. But they're also just kind of listening and making sure I don't forget anything or misspeak on anything. So they're helping me out. In the chat, there's also a PDF of the slides for the PowerPoint if you want to take notes or just take them back as a reference. And we are recording this Zoom, so we'll have it available for anyone who wanted to go back and rehear something, reference something, or for anybody that wasn't able to participate. All right, so format, we're gonna start with some FAFSA specific information applicable to any college or university, any school choice. So really just specific to how to file the FAFSA, what is it, some common mistakes, some common questions. Next, I'll give some South Dakota specific information. And so I know not everyone listening is from South Dakota, so hang in there during that portion. And then lastly, we'll have some Augustana specific scholarship information. So for anybody who's listening who has a student interested in Augustana or becomes interested in Augustana, we'll have some specific scholarship information about us at the end. All right, so Financial Aid 101. I like to usually start by just kind of a general description of, that term financial aid. And I use the term financial aid as sort of an umbrella term to explain any way that a student might pay for the cost of going to college. So it's gift aid, free money, the scholarships, which are usually based on talent or merit, grants, which tends to be based on need, but then it also includes student loans or parent loans. It includes work, having a job to pay for school. So it's kind of, financial aid encompasses lots of different ways to cover the costs of being a student. All right, what is the FAFSA? The FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it is an online application provided by the Federal Department of Education. It's available at studentaid.gov, and it's an annual application. So each year a student attends school or plans to attend school, is thinking about attending school, they need to refill out or renew their FAFSA. There's no fee to filling out the FAFSA, and each time that you fill it out, you can provide it to multiple schools at one time. The FAFSA is also correctable, so as you work on it, you may go back and realize you misreported something. So just know that it's an open application, and it's not uncommon for students to have multiple, what we call transactions of their FAFSA. They filled it out, they needed to correct something, we get a second version, and that kind of a thing. So free application for federal student aid is real basic FAFSA, and it's found at studentaid.gov. What does the FAFSA do? The FAFSA, predominantly, you put in all the information, and it calculates what's called an expected family contribution, or you'll see it referenced as EFC, expected family contribution. What is an EFC? It's an index number. The EFC can be as low as 000,000. It can go up to 999,999. So that's obviously quite a significant spread, but that's what the FAFSA is trying to calculate through a pretty in-depth and elaborate formula with lots of different variables going into the calculation. So the EFC is not what you're going to pay for college. It's not literally a dollar figure. So it's not what your student will pay, nor is it the amount of financial aid that they'll receive. So it is an index number. The first step to filing the FAFSA is, in our experience, the trickiest. And it's surprisingly the trickiest because it's just creating what's called a federal student aid ID. It's that username password combination that gives your student and yourself as a parent access to the FAFSA. And the reason we see this as the trickiest step is because in real life, it's unusual for the student to sit down and work on their FAFSA by themselves, start to finish. And it's also unusual for a parent to sit down and work on the FAFSA, start to finish, because everybody has lots going on and they're trying to do this, and the mom's trying to do this, and the dad's trying to do this, and things get mixed up. And so our best advice on FSA-ID creation is to just slow down, pay attention. Are you looking at the student's information? Are you looking at the parent information? And this is a time where I actually suggest writing down what was your username? Which email did you link it to? What's the password that you created? You're probably going to use this FSA ID once or twice a year, and so it's also pretty easy to forget. Another kind of quick tip is you're given the opportunity to include your cell phone number, and that will not create any robocalls or solicitations or anything like that. But it is very handy when you go back and you can't remember your username or you can't remember your password, and it's built in to generate a code to your cell phone that can help you quick retrieve that information. So an FSA ID is necessary for the student FAFSA filer. The student needs to use their own social security number and use their own mobile phone number or their own email address, and also an email address that won't be turned off upon graduation. So for students that have a high school email that won't work after they graduate high school, have them use a different email address, maybe create a new one, a Gmail or something like that. So the student needs their social security number and their phone number and email address, and they create a username and password. So does one parent. We'll get to who's a parent, but if you have two parents in your household, only one needs to have an FSA ID for themselves. If you have a single parent household, obviously that parent would need to create one for his or herself. Okay, the FAFSA becomes available every October 1st. There's always a FAFSA out there to fill out. Usually 2 school years at one time are available. So you want to fill out the FAFSA that's applicable to the school year that you're going to enroll in college. So for instance, right now on September 29th, any high school student could go fill out the FAFSA, but they would be filling out the 2020-21 FAFSA the year they're still in high school. So you just want to wait till October and then anytime thereafter so that the next school year becomes available. So on October 1st, on Thursday, the FAFSA for 2021-22 school year will be open online to fill out, and you can start filling it out. You don't need to have it started and finished on October 1st, but that's just when it becomes available for continuing students to renew and for new students to fill out for the first time. You always start at studentaid.gov. You always start by logging in. You've created that FSA ID for your student, so you start by logging in as that student. And then as you're filling out the FAFSA, you just want to pay attention. There are sections that pertain to the student. There's income and asset information that's reported about the student. And then there's income and asset information that's reported on the parent. And you want to pay attention which section you're in, that you're accurately reporting whose is whose. A kind of common mistake we see is duplicated information. So we'll see that the student, interestingly enough, made as much or the exact same amount as his parents did. So that's probably just unnecessarily incorrectly duplicating information. So pay attention along the tabs. You can list up to 10 schools to have your FAFSA automatically transmitted to. If you need more than 10, you hit submit and you can go back in and swap out some schools. But that seems to be a high enough threshold for most prospective students. When the schools get the FAFSA results, we only see that we were included. Schools don't know the other schools a student listed. That's supposed to help the student not have any competitive advantage or disadvantage from one school to the next. While you're filling out the FAFSA, you're going to provide some pretty basic information, demographic information, name, address, phone numbers, things like that. But you're also going to provide year-specific income information. So for instance, for the 21-22 academic year, you're going to provide 2019's income information. And a slick way to do that is to elect to use the data retrieval tool, an IRS link within the FAFSA, to go grab the correct tax information. So as you're filling out the parent income information and or the student income information, for anybody who submitted a tax return for 2019, you can go have the IRS find your return right within their database and pull over the figures that you need to report on the FAFSA. They'll go in the correct spot. So it's really advisable because it saves you time and it's automatically verifying and putting the information in correctly when it comes to income. As you're going through the FAFSA, if you're not sure what a question is asking or how you should answer a question, what to include in that question, there is a help menu for every box. So as you put your cursor through and you stop, there's a help menu. And actually, those are actually really pretty helpful. They do clear up quite a few of the most common questions on what that FAFSA question is asking about. Once you get through all of the answering all the questions, the last step is to sign and submit the FAFSA. Also kind of a common mistake is that you saved your FAFSA, you filled out, you saved it, you just didn't transmit it. And so be sure that at the end, the student's FSA ID and one parent FSA ID is used to electronically sign and submit the FAFSA. That's what will transmit it to the schools provided. If you're unable to, as a parent, if you're unable to sign the FAFSA electronically, there's a number of reasons that could be. You do have other options. You can print a signature page and physically mail it into the FAFSA processing center, and that will work too. It slows down the FAFSA processing a little bit, but not bad. All right, so you filled out your FAFSA successfully. It calculated an expected family contribution. So now what does that mean? It's an index, but what does it mean? It's going to mean something a little different at every school. So financial need is a school-by-school calculation. It is the math equation of cost of attendance minus expected family contribution. That's your financial need. So that starting number in that simple equation is cost of attendance. Each school has a cost of attendance. No school has the same cost of attendance. The components that make up a cost of attendance are tuition and fees, housing and meals. That might be on-campus room and board. It might be living off campus and eating. But there's an allowance or a calculation for housing and meals. Transportation and personal or miscellaneous expenses are usually averages or allowances that a school will calculate that the typical student pays. But transportation is to and from campus for class. It might be transportation to and from campus for breaks and holidays, that type of thing. And then personal miscellaneous expenses can vary quite a bit, but it's kind of those expenses you just incur day-to-day life. And I'm just noticing that one component of cost of attendance I failed to include is books and supplies. So we got tuition and fees, books and supplies, housing and meals, transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. So to give you an idea of how your financial need really varies school by school based on the cost of the school, you can see that real basic school A versus school B. School A has a $22,000 cost of attendance. There may be a four-year public university. School B has a $52,000 cost of attendance. They're likely a private school. Your FAFSA calculated EFC is $15,000 no matter which school the student chooses. So at school A, that student has $7,000 of financial need. At school B, that student has $37,000 of financial need. So it's obviously quite different. What does that mean as far as the age eligible for? That's kind of another case by case. But this is just kind of giving you an idea of, what's cost of attendance, what's EFC, what's financial need, and why is it different from one school to the next? Why is your financial aid offer different from one school to the next? Okay, so the FAFSA really specifically gives a student access to 3 types of federal financial aid. So every FAFSA filer is kind of saying, I'm interested in or I'm applying for the Department of Ed federal government programs. And that kind of starts with loans, direct loans, the federal direct loan program. Any student that's eligible to fill out the FAFSA is most likely eligible to borrow a federal direct loan. The student may see some of that loan subsidized, or they may see all of it unsubsidized. A subsidized direct loan means that it's not accruing any interest while the student is enrolled at least part-time. So if you have subsidized loan eligibility, the principal you borrowed in years 1, 2, 3, 4 is still what you owe back upon graduation. Subsidized direct loans do accrue interest once they are in repayment, but they are interest-free while you're enrolled at least part-time. A direct unsubsidized loan is going to accrue interest as soon as it's dispersed. So as the fall semester starts and the aid is dispersed, that loan starts accruing interest. Interest rates are fixed on one school year at a time. So every July, the federal interest rate set for the next school year. So essentially a student would finish 4 years of a college or university with 4 different loans and each at a fixed interest rate. Students can pay off the interest while they go, and they can let it accrue. There's no payments necessary on either a subsidized or unsubsidized loan until you're in repayment. There's also a federal direct option for parents. It's called a Parent Plus loan. And that would be either biological or step parent can borrow a plus loan. They would do that separately through studentaid.gov, and it's predominantly a credit check if they're approved or denied as a plus loan borrower. And then you can see how the loan limits vary. So a freshman, a first-year student, can borrow for the whole school year $5,500, and that's just the maximum amount. Of that $5,500, $3,500 of it can be subsidized. Nobody ever gets the whole amount subsidized. A sophomore, once you've reached sophomore status, you can borrow $6,500 for the year, and $4,500 of that can be subsidized. And then junior and senior years are the same amount, $7,500 for the year, or $5,500 subsidized and $2,000 unsub. And then the plus loan amount is different from these set student amounts in that the plus loan that a parent can borrow is the amount up to their cost of attendance. So kind of that remaining financial need figure. So that can vary, and you don't have to borrow that amount, but that's the maximum eligibility. All right, the second federal program through the FAFSA is grants. The federal Pell Grant, SEOG grant, and Teach grant. Federal Pell Grant, SEOG grants are for the same kind of population of students. Students who have an EFC of 0 to 5711 or 0 to 5700. Those students are eligible for Pell Grant, and the grants range from $639 to $6,345. So the closer your EFC is to 0, the higher your Pell Grant amount is. SEOG grants are awarded to Pell Grant eligible students, but they're what we call a campus-based program, and so there's only so many funds at each school in the SEOG program. So schools will determine how they offer SEOG, how much to who. The minimum SEOG, if included, is $100, but it can be up to $4,000 per year. So if you see your student through the FAFSA is eligible for Pell Grant, you should see the same amount of Pell Grant offered from every school, offered on every financial aid award. That's kind of a nice double check. But that same student may see varying SEOG amounts. All right, there's also a Teach grant, and Teach grants require the student to fill out a FAFSA, but they are not need-based. So your EFC can be anywhere in between that 0 and 999 range. Teach grants aren't need-based. The grant amount is just under $4,000. It's kind of a specific $3,764, and that's for the year. And you can elect to use the Teach grant 1 semester, up to 8 semesters, or up to $16,000. Students who choose to use the Teach Grant have an obligation to be a teacher, and they need to be a teacher in a low-income qualifying school in a shortage subject for 4 out of their first 8 years after college. In our experience, we try to over-counsel students on whether the Teach Grant is the right fit for them. Some students know right away as they enter college that teaching is their chosen profession, and this shortage subject is definitely what they want to teach. Other students need to take a semester or two and take some education courses and determine that that's for sure what they want to do before they start using the Teach Grant. So it varies, and students should get some good counseling before they decide what to do. But if you use the Teach Grant one semester or all 4 years, you'll have that obligation of teaching. And if not, if you change your mind on your major, or if you secure a job that isn't a qualifying school district, or if you just don't teach, the funds that you had in a Teach Grant then become a direct unsubsidized loan with the accrued interest. So that's kind of the risk reward, and why learning as much as you can about the Teach Grant beforehand is important. While it's non-need based, there are some academic benchmarks. So students need to have a 3.25 GPA in high school and every semester cumulatively in college to be eligible for the Teach Grant, or they need to have a test score in the 75th percentile. All right, lastly, the FAFSA gives students access to potentially a work-study opportunity. Work-study is, again, need-based and campus-based. So there are pools of funds at each school, and schools will, of all the FAFSA federal aid programs, work-study really varies the absolute most from school to school on which students are eligible, how much is offered, how it works. But it provides students a part-time job while they're enrolled in school. It's meant to help pay the cost of school. Jobs might be on campus, jobs might be off campus. They may directly be applicable to the students, what they're studying, and they may not necessarily. Some schools offer as many students as are eligible for work study. They offer the opportunity, and the student has to find and secure their own job. Other schools do it more directed, where a student might see a work study opportunity and be placed in a job. So it can really vary, and you just have to kind of dig in and ask some specific questions, like, how does work study, I see I'm offered work study at your school. How does that work? Do I have to find my own job? Does someone help me find a job? The hourly wage can vary. It can vary anywhere from minimum wage up to more than that. So it's good just to kind of know the specifics as your student determines if that's something that they want to take on as a student. There are students that are work study eligible that elect not to have a job on campus for various reasons. Maybe they want to start school without that on their plate, and that's a nice luxury. Some students decide they're going to keep the job they had in high school, and they're going to keep doing that, or all kinds of combinations. We have students at Augustana that have a work study job, have an off-campus job, have no job, have a combination. It's just very specific to each student and what the right balance is for them. All right, here's some common FAFSA questions that we get asked pretty regularly. The first one is, do I have to use parent information on the FAFSA? Generally, for the typical high school student or college student, the answer is yes. The FAFSA does consider most students what are called dependent FAFSA filers. To be an independent FAFSA filer and not required to include your parent information, you need to be 24 years of age, a graduate student, a veteran of the military, married, have your own dependents, or be in foster care, ward of the court, certifiably homeless. So if a student fits into any of these categories, they mark that in the FAFSA application itself when they're filling out the FAFSA. And sometimes schools will follow up, and sometimes they won't. So some schools will require, I guess, proof of that you do have a dependent of your own, or proof that you are in legal guardianship, or those kinds of things. And so that's common. That's not that's not uncommon for schools to ask for some of that follow-up documentation to just verify that the student is actually an independent student, because it's mostly prevalent that college students are dependent and required to provide their parents information. All right, then who is a parent? The FAFSA has some of its own unique rules, and who is a parent starts with biological parents. So if a student has two biological parents and they are living together, whether married or unmarried, those two parents are parent one and parent two on the FAFSA. If a student has biological parents that aren't living together, then the student needs to determine which parent's household is the FAFSA filing parent. We get this question very, very often, and there's two ways to determine which non-married, non-living together parents you pick on your FAFSA. The first is, who did you live with the most in the last 12 months? So over the last year, which parent did you spend the most time living with? And if that's simply parent mom or parent dad, that's easy. It was dad, okay. Then you look at dad's household. Is dad remarried? That becomes parent two. So dad and stepmom are the parent one and parent two on the FAFSA. If dad is not remarried, then you have one parent on your FAFSA. Often families share time very equally. And so if you can't determine which parent's information to use based on who you spent more time with and lived with in the last 12 months, then the second step is who provided you the most financial support. And that's the parent, that's the household that is reported on the FAFSA. Typically, typically those two questions should get you to which parent should be on the FAFSA. Students that are in legal guardianship, their legal guardians never become their FAFSA parents. So if you're in legal guardianship, you would simply work with your school, because you would be an independent FAFSA filer and not required to include parent information. Grandparents are also not parents on the FAFSA. So that's where you're determining, is your parent actually needing to be on the FAFSA, or are you in legal guardianship and your grandparents are your guardians? But grandparents themselves aren't considered parents on the FAFSA. All right, we also get lots of questions about assets, and assets are really tricky, and there's so much in the financial world that we aren't necessarily experts on. And so oftentimes tricky asset questions require us to do a little research and follow up with folks that ask about it. But often it's easier to tell you what not to include in the asset question. There's kind of three predominant asset questions on the FAFSA. And you do not need to value the home that you live in. That is not an asset on the FAFSA. The vehicles that you drive, those are not assets on the FAFSA. Anything that's as part of the parent's retirement portfolio, or anything that falls under a retirement umbrella, that is not an asset on the FAFSA. If you are a farmer, like if you have a farm, you live on your farm, you materially participate in your farm, that is your occupation, that will come through with your tax information, but the farm itself is not an asset. Same with small business owners. So if you have a small business and you have 100 or less full-time employees, your income from that business will come through with your tax information, but the business itself isn't an asset separately reported. Two things that are assets are college savings plans. The whole value of the college savings plan, like a 529 plan, is included on the parent's asset. It's a parent asset on the parent side of the FAFSA. And that can get annoying because you might have 3 children and $30,000 in a college savings plan. In your mind, you've got $10,000 per kid. But the fluid nature of college savings plans and the ability for you to transfer funds between your children really easily, the FAFSA says that the whole value is reported at one time each year. So also, if you have land and you have or real estate, those are also assets on the FAFSA. All right, some kind of common FAFSA errors, Social Security numbers. If you transpose a couple numbers in the Social Security number, the easiest way to fix that is to start all the way over. And that's extra work. But if you try to correct a Social Security number on the student that was initially entered wrong, it will just drag along forever and cause you problems and problems and problems. So if you accidentally enter your student's Social Security number wrong, just start all the way over with a brand new FAFSA, start from scratch. Oftentimes, the who's a parent and which parent's information is included, that's a pretty common error, but correctable. Income, paying attention to some of those additional income questions that don't come over with your IRS data retrieval from your taxes. Those can get confusing, so just kind of use those help menus or ask somebody. Federal income tax paid is if you don't use the data retrieval tool, you're just trying to manually answer questions. People often confuse that with what you got in a refund or another figure. And then household size. Household size is the people that live in that household and are supported by that income. So if you have one or two parents, you have the student, and then you have other siblings, step-siblings, sometimes grandparents, other people that live in that household and are supported by the income. And then the number in college. The number in college is really counting just the dependents in that household that are in school. So the FAFSA does not allow you to include a parent who might be a student. It's just how many of your kids are a student in that school year. 1, 2, sometimes 3. All right. Lastly, a common error too on any assets, you want to make sure you're using like the net value of an asset. So this is what it's worth, and this is what we owe against it still, and net those out. That's really the only value of the asset you need to provide. Okay, special circumstances. Sometimes you fill out the FAFSA and you fill out exactly correctly, and then life happens in the middle of a school year, or the fact that the FAFSA uses, what's called prior year income information. So 2019's income is driving the 21-22 school year. That automatically is sort of old and outdated. Things have possibly changed since then. So special circumstances is this opportunity for FAFSA filers to work directly with financial aid offices at each school or the school they attend to update components of their FAFSA to more accurately reflect their current financial situation. So the easiest, obvious one is, this is what you earned as a parent in 2019. Since then, you've lost your job or you've had a reduction in income. That income level is just no longer what your household's bringing in. So financial aid directors like myself can work with you on documenting that special circumstance, kind of that burden of proof. What has happened? Prove that it happened. And then we can change some of the components of your FAFSA to, again, better reflect your current situation. FAFSA verification. Once you've hit submit on your FAFSA, it goes into processing for a couple of days, actually, where it's not available to you, the filer, or to the schools yet. And within that processing, about a third, a pretty good chunk of all FAFSAs get flagged or what's called selected for verification. So as the FAFSA comes to the school or schools you listed, it's got a code on it that tells us this FAFSA was selected for verification. And then it's the school's responsibility to verify the data that was reported is accurate. And we're verifying income information, household size, some but not all of the information that you reported. Typically, you need to do kind of two things. You need to prove the income, and you may have already done that by using the IRS data retrieval tool, and that automatically proves or verifies the income. If you didn't do that, you may need to request a tax return transcript, or sometimes you can provide a signed copy of your tax return. So that would be required on the student side if they file the tax return and on the parent side. Schools also probably have an internal verification form to fill out. but that's going to look different at every school. So we aren't provided a standard form by the Department of Education or anything like that. We have our own forms. So if your FAFSA is selected and you send it to 4 schools and it's selected for verification, you need to do verification separately at each of those 4 schools. We need to have the verification completed before we're allowed to disperse any of the federal financial aid to that student. So it is nice if you can work quickly on that, just so that your financial aid isn't held up or any information is held up as your student's trying to pick a college. Okay. All right, so switching gears here. Done with the FAFSA conversation, kind of going on to what other resources are there for paying for college. Outside scholarships is a great resource. Right now, any seniors in high school should be hopefully diligently looking for outside private scholarships, because they're likely any of that money that they earn for themselves that isn't from the school they're attending goes with them to whatever school they pick. Within South Dakota, for South Dakota high school graduates, our Board of Regents provides a couple of scholarship opportunities that I'll talk about next. Local students can use the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, and then any student in any area really just start like local and personal in nature. So your high school, your community, your church, the clubs and organizations you already participate in, your own part-time employer, your parents' employer. Kind of exhaust all those things that are local and personal to you. Then use a large scholarship search, and that's kind of more volume, but that's going to give you access to all kinds of different scholarships across the US. Okay, so for South Dakota high school grads enrolling in a South Dakota college or university, the Opportunity Scholarship is available if you qualify. So the application is very simple. There's a one-page application, and your final high school transcript are how you apply for the Opportunity Scholarship. And most high school students are pretty well versed and know about this opportunity. So if you are eligible, certified eligible, you would receive it. So it's not competitive, or it's not first come, first serve, or for instance. It's a $6,500 scholarship over 4 years. So a student would specifically receive $650 every semester, or $1,300 a year for years 1, 2, and 3, and then it doubles for the 4th year to $2,600. To be eligible for the Opportunity Scholarship out of high school, there's 2 routes to eligibility. The first is an ACT score of 24, a GPA of 3.0, and completion of kind of the Regents curriculum. There's a list of courses you need to have completed with at least a grade of C. The other route is to score a 28 on the ACT, and then you need to have met all the college readiness benchmarks on your ACT sub-scores. Currently, with COVID, there are some waivers and some other ways to be eligible for the Opportunity Scholarship through the Smarter Balance scores. But I'm gonna not get into that specifically, because it hasn't necessarily been applied to the next class of students. But the South Dakota Board of Regents website is a great resource to look up any of these scholarships. All right, so if you're eligible for the Opportunity Scholarship out of high school, you'll see it on your financial aid for your first year, and then you need to remain eligible. So like I said, most high school students understand how to become eligible for the Opportunity Scholarship, but in my experience, seem somewhat surprised that there's continuing eligibility benchmarks. So at the end of your first year of college, and then every semester, you need at least a cumulative 3.0 GPA to continue your eligibility for the Opportunity Scholarship the next $650, the next semester. If you don't meet that 3.0 GPA, you go on hold or pause, and you lose the money for the next semester or 2. But once you get that GPA back up to 3.0, you can restart that scholarship. You don't ever get back the money you missed in those semesters, but you can restart it. You get that one chance to dip below and get back on track with your GPA. You also need to earn 30 cumulative credits before your second year. And those are cumulative, meaning college credits you earned in high school plus that year into year 2, and then 60 and 90. So that benchmark you really got to pay attention to, because if you don't meet 30, 60, 90 credits, there's no recouping that, and you've forfeited the rest of the scholarship. Okay, also for South Dakota high school grads willing to stay in South Dakota for school is the Dakota Core Scholarship. And this one is competitive. Only a set number of students that apply for it will receive it. So whereas if you meet the eligibility of the Opportunity Scholarship, you'll receive it, the Dakota Core does not have that guarantee. So students with a 2.8 GPA and a 27 ACT are eligible to apply. You need to apply by February 1st. Again, the South Dakota Board of Regents website is where you can get the application. And then again, this is kind of like a risk reward, like the Teach Grant, where you're going to, if selected for this scholarship, receive full tuition. But then you need to agree to stay in South Dakota for typically 5 years after you graduate, but it's the number of years you had the scholarship plus 1, and work in a critical need occupation. You can use their website to find what are those critical need occupations. So again, it doesn't hurt to apply and see if you're selected. Then you have to make the decision of using that scholarship or not. And it's a full tuition scholarship, so it's a big deal. It's a big scholarship. Again, if you don't fulfill the obligation, that scholarship reverts to a loan and the student pays it back. All right, additional South Dakota scholarships. Jumpstart, if you finish high school in 3 years, a year early, that's $1,500 for the 4th year. You get in a scholarship, a one-time 1-year scholarship the 1st year of college. And then Build Dakota. So for students looking at any of our technical colleges, Build Dakota could be a good opportunity for them. It's competitive, you have to apply for it, but our 4 technical schools in South Dakota have varying amounts of partnerships and varying amounts of scholarships to give. But again, it's full tuition, fees, books, and supplies. So it's a really big scholarship. And then you have an obligation to live and work in South Dakota in that field you were trained in for 3 years after you graduate. So if that's something you're interested in, Build Dakota, the website is very helpful, but actually just connecting with the technical school you're interested in and someone on that campus is my best advice for that one. All right, so if you're interested in Augustana, we hope you are. We love to work with students, and we'd love to answer questions. And so maybe you weren't before the call, but maybe you are now. But Augustana University offers scholarships through our admission application process. So when you apply for admission, which you can now, we have rolling admission. We admit students every week. You're automatically applying for scholarships from the university. And our scholarships are kind of merit-based or academic-based, and we use your high school GPA or your ACT, SAT score. So we look at both and see which is stronger, and that determines if you earn a scholarship from us, and that scholarship would range from $17,000 to $24,000, and that's a per year amount, and it's you need to remain a full-time student, and it renews as long as that you remain full-time student status. If you haven't had the chance to take the ACT or SAT yet, that's okay. We can determine it using just your GPA. And if you're still planning to take the ACT or SAT yet this fall, you get that score, and if that ends up being stronger than what your GPA was, we'll recognize that. So we let students have this first kind of half of their senior year of high school to work on that academic piece for scholarships, because we want you to apply. We don't want you to wait to apply for admission because you have an ACT test coming up in October or December, something like that. We also have other scholarship opportunities that we stack with your academic merit-based scholarship. So when you apply for admission, you're automatically considered for that scholarship and awarded it. We also consider students for kind of talent scholarships and a variety of other scholarships. Performing and visual arts would be band, orchestra, choir, music, theater. It's for artists. And we have quite a few different opportunities in this area. Students can audition for what we call a Pro Musica scholarship. Students can submit interest for an all-state music scholarship. That's any student who was a part of an all-state music ensemble in high school. We have marching band scholarships, and we have students are offered scholarships to participate in theater and to be artists. So there's quite a bit of ways to earn a scholarship in that area. We have athletic scholarships. Those are kind of offered and determined by our head coaches. So if that's a part of your college search, we kind of encourage you to reach out to our coaches and to talk to them directly about athletic scholarships. We offer diversity scholarship. It's $1,000, and it's for any student of color, and you self-identify through your admission application. Our Alumni Legacy Scholarship is $1,000, and it is for students with a parent, grandparent, or sibling who graduated from Augustana. And then the Family Tuition Grant is for students who are enrolled at the same time as their sibling, usually their sibling. So if you have two students going to college at the same time, they each have a $500 Family Tuition Grant. And then our PACT program is a matching program for church scholarships. So if you happen to attend a church that's going to give your student a scholarship, Augustana would match that on our part up to $500 a year. And then we also actually match the South Dakota Opportunity Scholarship for this incoming class of fall 21. So for those students that are Opportunity Scholarship eligible, we do a match for years 1, 2, and 3. We don't match the 4th year when it's doubled by the Board of Regents already. All right. That concludes what I had prepared to share with everybody. If you have follow-up questions, you can email us, you can call us. We're happy to help with any kind of FAFSA questions you have or Augustana specific questions, anything like that.